Welcome to another episode of the Longevity Blueprint Podcast. Today we have on our show Dr. Amber Krogsrud. Dr. Amber is a licensed naturopathic doctor at Metro MD Institute of Regenerative Medicine in Los Angeles, California. She's trained in regenerative medicine, detoxification protocols, hormone testing and treatment, bioidentical hormone therapy, peptide therapy, and IV nutrient therapy. She also has a practice in Redondo Beach, California, where she specializes in bioidentical hormones and peptide therapy. Dr. Amber is also a member of the International Peptide Society and has completed the peptide therapy certification training through the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. So, welcome, Dr. Krogsrud.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. We're kindred spirits because we both work with women, work with hormones, and peptides are just a whole new exciting topic that we get to share with the world today.
They absolutely are. I can't wait to get to that. But I think let's open talking about mitochondria. So I recently had Dr. Terry Walls on as a guest. She's a colleague and friend also from Iowa. And we talked about her Walls protocol that she strategically created to fuel her mitochondria with food. Above and beyond diet, today I want to get into what nutrients, even supplements, you believe are best for fueling our mitochondria. But let me first start by asking you what our mitochondria are and what they do.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I have this conversation with a lot of my patients, bring up the word mitochondria, and a lot of times I kind of get like a blank look, like what are the mitochondria? Going back to, eighth grade biology of what they are. But they're really, the example I like to give is they're the powerhouse of the cell. So I live in LA, and we have, multiple places where we generate power here. But if those were to all discontinue producing power at this very moment, the entire city of LA, which is like a cell, would not function appropriately. All of the other things that would happen, I wouldn't be able to charge my laptop or my phone or run the dishwasher, all of those things. And so a similar thing happens in our mitochondria. They are the powerhouse of the cell. They're making ATP, energy for the cell to do all of its functions to protect itself. So it really has, the mitochondria have a dual function. They protect the cell from damage, and they also produce energy. And so when they're so focused on one task, they're maybe less efficient at the others. It's really important to have this robust energy production of ATP so that all of our cells are functioning appropriately. And, what we see is as we age and as there's more oxidative stress and our mitochondria quit working as effectively producing that ATP to fuel the cell to do its work, we end up experiencing things like lethargy, brain fog, fatigue, because we know that the two cells that have the most mitochondria are the nerve cells, so the brain, a lot of nerve tissue, and the muscles, right? Which is why in a lot of these conditions like MS and ALS, even like fibromyalgia, chronic pain, where we can trace that back to a mitochondrial dysfunction that's happening. Even autism, there's a lot of literature out there right now and some clinics that specialize in autism, and they're using a mitochondrial based approach because we're identifying, when we're having nerve conduction, nerve issues, cognitive things, maybe it's related to mitochondria. And we're finding that it is. So, I think it's not really something that most people probably wake up thinking about, how can I help my mitochondria today? But the more that I learn about it, and the more that, as practitioners, we learn about it, we view the world through this lens of, wow, how can we support these systems and help our patients, educate them on how to support their mitochondria, producing energy, really protecting and preventing illness through a mitochondrial lens.
That's awesome. So how do we do that? So how do we support our mitochondria? Maybe let's start from a lifestyle standpoint, and then we'll get into nutrients and supplements.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that can really support mitochondrial function. One of the things that has been researched is fasting that can actually be really supportive. So intermittent fasting, doing a couple day fast can kind of recalibrate those mitochondria. They get really efficient. Our cells become more efficient in that state. One of the things that I like to do lifestyle-wise is a red light. So I actually have one sitting right by me here that I'll turn on when I'm working. But what we know that red light, that wavelength, does is it can actually help to activate the mitochondria to work more effectively, which is really pretty cool if you think about light as a biocharger of our cells. There's many other things, looking at diet, looking at antioxidants, really fortifying the diet, or supplementation if we can't get it through diet, with things that are going to protect the mitochondria from damage, because we have DNA in our mitochondria too, right? We learn about that in med school, and not only does the nucleus have mitochondria, but the nucleus have DNA where the mitochondria does as well. So it just becomes really important to add in all those antioxidants, and we can talk about some of those antioxidants.
Let's go back to red light therapy, because I'm kind of a podcast junkie. I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and recently I listened to one that talked a lot about red light therapy. And so I am, again, not an expert. I hope to bring on an expert one day to more discuss that. But tell us how you utilize yours. So when you say you turn that on when you're working, like how many minutes, how many times a day, how are you utilizing that? And how do you feel that you've benefited from it?
Great question. I love talking and sharing with this with my patients, and I think even better to share it out to the masses on a podcast. So I use mine for about 15 to 20 minutes a day. There's diminishing effects using it much longer than that. Using it for like 2 hours is probably not going to produce a massive effect, but it's really a small threshold. I don't know if have you seen those caps that you can get for hair regrowth?
Oh yeah. I use one, not the cap, a larger machine. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I use my red light for hair regrowth and for skin in a similar way that the cap does. So I just, lay my head against it and, read a book or something. So, and then I'll do micro needling on my skin, and I'll use it to help regenerate the collagen in my skin. So, and then what I'll also do is kind of lean my my lower back, because I'll just get kind of muscle tension from exercising or sitting, working at a desk a lot. And I actually find that it does, because it supports mitochondria, it can help with muscle repair post-exercise or just sitting a lot. So it can help with muscle tension that way. But What's your experience?
Well, not much yet, but I think that's the main application that many individuals are familiar with, like recovery, repair. But I'm more fascinated. So I have used it for skin or for hair regrowth, stop some hair loss, but I haven't used it on my face, like for my skin, for collagen. So I'd like to purchase an in-home machine that looks very portable, very easy.
Portable.
Yeah.
Super easy to, you could travel with it if you really wanted to.
Very cool. Thank you for that tip. I didn't really think of that as supporting mitochondrial health, but obviously it makes sense that it would. Cool.
It does.
So let's talk about the antioxidants you were mentioning. So let's go into some of those. What are your top few that you recommend?
So we'll walk through a few. The one that's really commonly known because of statin drugs is CoQ10.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one. CoQ10 is that coenzyme. It carries electrons into the electron transport chain, which is what's happening in the mitochondria to make that ATP. So it's a really important piece for the process of generating energy in the cell. And when we don't have enough CoQ10, our mitochondria is more susceptible to damage, oxidative stress, so it's super protective. So I like to, especially if they're on a statin drug, but even not, adding in some CoQ10, because it's not really something that's found in a ton of foods.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's really something that you have to supplement with. And then a couple of the other ones, I love alpha lipoic acid, and then acetyl L-carnitine. And acetyl L-carnitine is the one that's touted as, the fat burning nutrient, and it's found in meats. For someone who's vegan, they're probably not going to get a ton of L-carnitine in their diet, so that one might be better supplemented for them. And we learned this in medical school too. What L-carnitine does is it takes those fatty acids in our adipose tissue, shuttles them into the mitochondria to be burned for energy.
Kind of like coal in a train is how I describe that to my patients. It shovels that coal in. Not that a lot of trains still use coal, but you get the analogy that that's required for that train to go.
Absolutely. I love using analogies too, because I think that can really help to understand what's happening with this entire world that's in our body that we aren't seeing on a daily basis.
Let's talk a little bit about doses of those. So interestingly, recently I've had a lot of patients with breast cancer, and I know there have been several studies linking I would just say just demonstrating that patients with breast cancer tend to have lower levels of CoQ10. And it's so interesting in my practice that when I test these patients, many of them are indeed low. So I typically start patients on about 100 milligrams of CoQ10. Now, if they're on medications like you mentioned, like a statin medication or blood pressure medications, diabetes medications, how I was trained, and you can tell me what your thought process on this is to add another 100 milligrams for each of those drugs, because that depletion is going to be worse with the addition of each medication. So some patients will put on 300 milligrams of CoQ10, just monitoring blood pressure, because it's a healthy way to help lower blood pressure, but if patients don't tolerate it, then we can back down on the dose. But that's typically what I'm recommending.
Yes, I usually start at 100 milligrams as well, and then, contingent upon other medications that they're on. I think that's I completely agree with that protocol.
Alpha-lipoic acid I also use as well. The only downside that I find with that is it can drop blood glucose, not blood pressure, but blood glucose. So it's actually great for patients with neuropathy and with diabetes, but that's one thing we need to monitor. So I'll start patients 300, 600 milligrams, sometimes get up to 1200.
Yeah. I usually start about 200, 300 milligrams of alpha-lipoic acid. Yeah. But because it works on the liver, it absolutely impacts blood glucose. Yeah. It's a powerful one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then acetyl L-carnitine, I usually will start about 500 milligrams. Yeah. Twice a day, once a day. Yeah.
Awesome. We have a product called Mitochondrial Complex that is packed with all those antioxidants that I just feel like I can't live without. It's a multivitamin that also has those. And when I was pregnant and breastfeeding, I couldn't take it because it helps with detox. And so I couldn't wait to be able to get back on it. And now I'm back on it, and I feel better. I have less brain fog. My energy's better, clearly because it's fueling my mitochondria. So, so I'm a big fan of those.
Yeah, that has really helped me too. I just remember how I felt graduating from medical school and undergrad. Just 11 years of school will do a lot to your body, in a negative way. And so, really supporting my mitochondria. When I learned about all this, I do feel better mentally, energy-wise than I had, reflecting back on what it was like graduating med school. So it's been really helpful for me as well. Yeah, so it's good to hear.
We're so blessed to have these tools.
Yes.
Not everyone does, and that's why we're sharing them with others.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, let's talk about a nutrient known as NAD that I've been just more recently utilizing in my practice. I don't know if you went to the A4M conference last December, but there's a speaker, Chris Shade from Quicksilver, spoke on NAD, and that reminded me, I better start using this nutrient again, because it kind of fell off my radar. But it is something that many of my patients are now asking me about, and it also can help with mitochondria. So tell us more about NAD and how you use it.
Yeah, so NAD is one of these amazing molecules. It's a coenzyme, and it's important for mitochondrial function. So it's a kind of an oxidation reduction process, which is just a chemical reaction for everybody listening. But it's involved really in the energy generation process. We know that as you age, your NAD levels decrease. And I've also had patients ask me, can we test your NAD levels? And or mitochondrial function. There's some things we could do to maybe get a glimpse at mitochondrial function, but we can't actually like measure your blood level of NAD or anything like that, or,
We can
find
measure
out if it's-
B2, like just plain,
Yes,
but not,
riboflavin.
yeah. And we can measure
Yeah.
B3, right? Like niacin.
Yes.
But we can't measure the specific form, like this NAD. We can measure niacin, but not this specific
Yes, exactly.
need for
Yeah.
this.
And yeah. And so NAD, we should say just what it means. It's nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. So we call it NAD because nobody wants to say that all day long. But really what NAD does is it helps the brain cells to age well. And then we talked a lot about mitochondrial function in the A4M module for peptides, and we talk about this molecule called PGC1 alpha. So it's just a signaling molecule, but NAD controls the signaling of PGC1 alpha, and that actually protects the cells against oxidative stress, that process. So when we give extra NAD or support the body to make more of its own NAD, we're producing that pathway, more NAD, more PGC1 alpha, less oxidative stress, less cellular damage. So that's kind of the why behind NAD. And there's lots of different methods that you can administer NAD, so we could
talk about
cover
those,
that too. Yeah. Yeah, so I think I've used all of them on myself at this point that I know about. There's an intranasal form that you can actually, it's very bioavailable to the brain, crosses the blood-brain barrier. And that one's combined, I think, with B12 and RG3, which is the red Korean ginseng.
Does that have to be compounded then? Is that a compounded nasal spray?
It's a compounded nasal spray. TaylorMade used to carry it. I don't know that they do anymore.
Sure.
But there's going to be places that other compounding pharmacies that make it. But the intranasal, I actually have really found that to be helpful with brain function. I'm a morning coffee drinker, and I have used that in place of it before, and found that just energy, brain function is supported through the morning, through the day. But
how long do you think that lasts? I mean, if you shoot it up your nose in the morning,
yeah.
how long do you think the effects are going to last?
A couple hours. Yeah,
Okay.
at least a couple hours. And of course, the dose that you take intranasally is not the same that you would give IV or even topically. It's just kind of hard to dose it as high. But if it's very specific for brain, for somebody who is having memory issues or, early dementia-like symptoms, using that form could be a little bit more specific to the brain, which could be great, or even autism.
Yeah. Awesome.
So I love that form. And then there's also, so we have our IVs, which is kind of where a lot of people have heard about NAD, the NAD IVs, a lot of addiction centers. There's one in San Diego that I'm very familiar with, the owner, and they use NAD for addiction protocols, for aging brains preventatively, using it for patients who do have a formal diagnosis of neurocognitive decline like dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. So lots of potential uses. The NAD IV, I'm sure you've had patients talk about the experience of the NAD IV. Are you familiar with the side effects or some
Are you talking about flushing, or are you okay?
Yeah, flushing. A lot of times nausea, they get it, and I've experienced it, kind of this like your stomach flips, feeling when you get an NAD IV. And it's the solution to that is to slow the drip rate or to start at a low dose. So when I give my patients NAD IVs and I give myself them, I usually start at 100 milligrams. And sometimes sometimes 200, but usually I'll start at a pretty low dose. A lot of the therapeutic IVs that they're giving at addiction facilities it's like a 4-hour drip, 500 milligrams. And that's a stomach flipping IV. I mean, you will have to drip that really slow because you could feel pretty uneasy for that period of time if you don't. So starting at a lower dose is great for most people. And it's interesting because some patients experience significant bursts of energy after that, and others will experience more fatigue. It could be due to some of the other things in the bag that help their detox pathways, and they're detoxing a lot. But the overall effect of the NAD is to help the mitochondria. If they're really in a depleted state, they might actually feel a little bit more tired. Most people feel energized, but it's hard to know how someone might respond to their first NAD IV.
So I don't know if you know the answer to this, but when I think of NAD, I think niacin, I think flushing.
Yeah.
So would a patient who needs help with methylation, would this be contraindicated in? Because many times for overmethylation, we'll use niacin. So because of the concern that many patients have with MTHFR variants, that they need help with methylation, should we be cautious using NAD in those patients or not?
Yes. I'm not 100% sure because I'm not an expert in genetics, but I do believe that Dr. Ben Lynch, who's a naturopathic doctor, and he talks a lot about methylation. And I think he actually has some content out about NAD and methylation. So
I will definitely look into that.
That's and a great question.
Speaking of genetics, there are genes, because I have some of them, that indicate an individual might likely benefit even more from NAD. So that's also something that we can look into with determining, the best antioxidants or the best, I should say the highest need for patients, like if they should take NAD or not.
Yes. And I think that's really an important piece too, is if we can get confirmation that it's going to be more effective for them specifically, it's going to be more of an opt-in when you can give it to a patient black and white, you need this molecule and here's why. I think it's easier to really give them that and have them continue taking it or sitting through an IV if that's what it takes. But
we offer IVs at my practice, but we have not yet done any sort of high dose NAD. Sure. So it's good to know about the flushing. I have a sublingual version here, sublingual kind of liposomal version. So that's all that I've recommended to this point, but we may have to try the nasal spray or the IVs. So those are good suggestions.
Yes. There's one more. So there's the sublingual. I actually have not tried the sublingual. So I would love to hear your experience with the sublingual.
Well, I personally haven't taken it because I was breastfeeding. I'm now done, but that's just the one that I've recommended in my practice. Yes. And only to a handful of patients who, they read about NAD and they were so convinced it's going to help. Sometimes I think there's a bit of a placebo effect that goes into, into that. But so far I've heard good things and not a lot of side effects, not a lot of flushing.
I'm
Tell us about the last route.
Yeah. So there's one more route, and that's transdermal. And that's a patch that goes on the skin. Actually, I'm peeling a little bit. I put one on, 2 days ago? And the patch is, so they actually send you the NAD fluid, this similar stuff to what you inject. And there's a little absorptive pad that you put the NAD fluid on, and then it's just a sticky. It's ion transport. So if you put just the straight fluid on your arm and just rubbed it in, nothing would happen. It's not bioavailable. So we've had to develop a way to actually get it to absorb well into the skin, and so it's iontophoresis and ion transport system. And generally, I've found that most people tolerate it pretty well. Like the only people who really shouldn't use the patch is somebody who so it works through electrical conduction. So somebody with a pacemaker, probably not a good individual, probably not in pregnancy, but really most individuals respond well to the patch, and it's less expensive than an IV. It's less time consuming. You don't have to go into a doctor's office. It's really a good option for many, many patients. I've had patients who are fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, have a lot of benefit from the patches in combination with other treatments, LDN, other things that we're doing to really support them too. So, but there's so many ways to take NAD. It's amazing.
That was wonderful. Well, let's transition into talking about peptides. So first, for my audience, peptides may be, and what you're about to speak about may be a different language. So
We'll
let's
break it
break
down.
down what peptides are first, and then we'll kind of talk about peptides for various things like mitochondrial function. So what are peptides?
Okay. Yes. So the analogy that I like to use, something that everybody understands, is, when you eat a piece of chicken or a piece of protein, I like to give the example of a piece of chicken. What your body does is it breaks it down through the digestive process. We have our stomach acid and all of our enzymes, pancreatic enzymes. But essentially, we have a protein in the chicken that breaks down to a peptide, and a peptide is just a subunit. It's like a train. So the train has many boxcars. All of those boxcars are amino acids. And then the smallest subunit is just a single amino acid. So we have the protein, the peptide, and then the amino acid, the small subunit. And so what peptides are, they're kind of that middle segment with lots of boxcars in a train. We can, put together different combinations of those boxcars or those amino acids. And what that does is it sends a different signal with different combinations. And so the way that peptides work is they work through cellular signaling. We know that all of our cells are like a planet. Think about Mars, and Mars has a bunch of docking stations on it where spaceships can land. And so this is the best, easiest way to envision what's happening with a peptide is, we inject or we take an oral form. There's lots of different forms of peptides, but it will bind to the cell just like a spaceship would on Mars, and something would change inside the cell. And to promote a process, to inhibit a process. In a lot of cases, we're talking about mitochondria, so we're supporting NAD, we're supporting the pathways for the mitochondria to protect the cell. So peptides are just signaling molecules. They just send a signal. We know from lots of research, there's been research done on peptides in Russia since the 1970s and 80s. We have research on peptides like apidolon, which lengthen telomeres, help an individual to produce more of their own melatonin, which is really important as we age, not only for sleep, but anti-inflammatory and immune effects. And so we know these pathways. We know the pathway for hair loss, for stem cells in the hair follicle, and what's happening. And so we can go in and we can give peptides like PTD-DBM, which is a peptide that signals the stem cells in the hair follicle to wake up and still produce. There's all sorts of peptides that signal protective processes, helping the mitochondria, helping for collagen synthesis. There's literally a peptide for
Everything.
Yeah, there's a peptide for everything, but they work through cellular signaling in essence.
So one main complaint that I have from patients coming to see me is they want to lose weight, of course, and we want to optimize their thyroid and their sex hormones and get them on clean eating and help with reducing insulin resistance and detox the body. There are multiple steps in my longevity blueprint that I walk patients through, but I think adding peptides is a whole nother layer that many patients have not yet been able to utilize. So can you speak to which peptides you use to help with, I say weight loss, but more or less body composition change, specifically getting rid of fat in certain areas, and then how those are administered, if they're injections or topicals? Speak a little bit to those peptides, the top ones that you use.
I love that question. Oh, so many good things to share. Okay, so one of my favorite peptides, and I work closely with a personal trainer in Hollywood who refers a lot of women to me with this weight loss is their number one goal, or body composition. They have to get in shape for, some event or thing that's going on. And so I've been asked this a lot and, had a lot of feedback on peptides and experiences from patients with them, and my own experience too. So the peptide combo there's two peptides that I'd like to really use kind of as a first line for, and this is after all of the, dietary, lifestyle, sleep, stress, cortisol, hormones, we do, that's first pillar. And to me, peptides are kind of next level. It's like once we've looked at all of those, and as much as possible helps to optimize the lifestyle pieces, then it's like, okay, let's add in the peptides. Sometimes adding in a peptide that helps deepen sleep, produce better energy, helps someone, it's a quick win. They get more energy to make those lifestyle changes. So, it's a cat and a mouse thing. Sometimes it actually helps to boost their energy, get them in a better mental, emotional place, increase their energy to make those lifestyle changes. But the two peptides that I like to use are CJC 1295 and ipamorelin. And those are just biochemical names that were given in the lab to these two peptides. Both of them work on the pituitary. So the CJC 1295 is like the production. So if you think about maybe like Target or a store, and you have the actual store that's producing all of these boxes, and then the ipamorelin is like the trucks that are delivering it to the body. That's the way that I like to think about it. So CJC increases production, ipamorelin is kind of the shipping it out and making it available.
Of growth hormone? Or
yes.
Okay, just to
of
clarify.
Growth hormone.
Okay.
Yes, of growth hormone. So and they're working on the pituitary. What they're really doing is helping your body to make more of its own. Very different than nortropin, any sort of exogenous growth hormone injections, which a lot of clinics do here in LA and around the country, where they're administering the exogenous form. So they're not helping your body to necessarily make more of its own. They're just injecting a separate source.
Sure.
And you can run into a lot of trouble doing that in terms of side effects, cardiac issues, acromegaly. Like there's a ton of side effects, and there's a time and place to use some of those exogenous growth hormone supplementation. But for the average person, what we want to do is really just refine their body's ability to make more of it themselves. And this is not, a lot of people are worried about cancer. This is one of the biggest questions around some of these peptides and increasing growth hormone. It can increase IGF-1, but it's so transient the way that peptides do it. We're trying to mimic the natural rhythm, which is what we try and do with bioidentical hormones too. Try and mimic that natural rhythm of what's happening in the body. And peptides are, really, you could term them bioidentical because it's really something that our body makes already, sure. Right? Like BPC 157. Are you familiar with that specific peptide?
Is that still available though, or not?
Yes, but that could change soon. It just depends where you source it from. But there's a reputable source that I have that's based out of LA, and there's a couple places, but there's also places where it's not available anymore. So there's a lot of changes FDA wise with peptides.
Sure. Yes. Unfortunately. Well, yes. New landscape with peptides. For the listener, that just means what used to be available isn't. Some of what used to be available is not still available, but practitioners like both of us are working to find some other solutions and alternatives for sure. I want to go back to hair loss real quick, because I think for those listening, they may be interested in what they can do for their hair loss. So which peptides do you use for hair loss? Even some other modalities like microneedling or PRP, or speak to that a little bit.
Oh yeah, that's a huge topic. So I do like to do the microneedling. So I have a microneedling pen at home. We have one at the clinic. And causing that kind of micro trauma to the area, we know that compounds the results of peptides. When you combine the microneedling plus the peptides, you get much better results. So people can apply the peptides topically, or there's one that you can inject for kind of collagen synthesis, the GHKCU.
Yep.
But they're more effective when done in a topical way with the microneedling. So the ones that I love are this one called PTD DBM, which is a really long, they abbreviate it for a reason. This is another one, valproic acid, which is very commonly used. There's a foam that you can apply after microneedling. And then the other one that I've used myself, both topically and injection, is called GHKCU. So it's a copper peptide. And a lot of people, when we talk about, just throw the word peptides out, they think, oh, the skin cream that I bought at Nordstrom's that has peptides in it. Or they think collagen peptides, which is, a supplement.
Yeah.
Similar idea, but different thing. So the GHKCU I actually love. So that one really helps. Copper is really necessary for collagen synthesis and connective tissue, but a lot of can really help with hair regrowth, with healthy skin as we age. So it depends. Usually I'll start with the GHKCU and then microneedling.
Topically or
topically? Yeah. You
Okay.
could do it. You could do the sub-Q injection of GHKCU, but I just start topically.
Sure.
And then, because that produces more of a systemic effect for women who really want to create healthy collagen systemically. But if we were looking local for hair, yes, topically. Valproic acid has been one of the more effective things that I learned about through A4M for hair loss topically as well, combined with microneedling.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. So for those listeners who want to know a lot more about peptides, you actually have a free gift that probably is going to help. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So it's the ProPeptide diet, and it really is a way of eating to help our body to regenerate and help our tissue, our collagen in our skin, our muscles to repair, looking at it from a mitochondrial perspective, as well as what's happening with the signaling and how can we shy of injecting peptides or using some of these things that you'd have to work with a doctor, how you can really eat and live in a way that promotes health of your tissues, diet, lifestyle, sleep, red light. Talk about a lot of those things.
We probably could talk for another hour, but
I'm sure
we have to have you back on again to talk about more peptides.
Yes.
So tell us what you think the average kind of cost of peptide therapy may be for some patients. That probably varies dramatically, but
yes,
peptides are not cheap. They're
they're not cheap. They are so in LA, a lot of it's comparable to what a man might pay for testosterone therapy on a monthly basis, like a bioidentical hormone.
Yep.
Or for some women too, if they're on all three hormones. So
sure.
It's in the range of $300 to $350, $400 a month. It depends on the protocol. Like Apidolon is a 10-day protocol, but you dose it really high, so it's kind of expensive for 10 days, but you don't do it every day, all day. And then things like the CJC ipamorelin, that's usually about a 3-month on, 3-month off. So it's not something that you're necessarily going to have to be on forever. But that one's about $300 to $350 a month. Sure. Depending on, if you buy 3 months or 1 month or so. Yeah. But it's comparable to bioidenticals in at least in LA, maybe different around parts of the country.
Sure. Well, tell us where listeners can find you and follow you on social media and learn more about what you have to offer.
Definitely. Yeah. So they can find me on my Instagram, which is Dr. DOCTOR, spelled out Amber ND, like North Dakota. That's my personal Instagram. And then I have an Instagram just for peptides, and that's Peptide RX. So just peptide and then RX. On Instagram, they can also look up, I have a Facebook group for peptides where people can ask questions, and I post a lot of PDFs and really helpful information about peptides. they can connect with me that way. I'm in the group. They can reach out if they have questions about peptides that way. And then my website is drambernd.com, and they can book an appointment, find out more about peptides there as well. So yeah, definitely happy to connect with anybody and talk about peptides. And there needs to be more shared for consumers in that way. There's a lot for doctors, but I think putting out more content about peptides for patients is a focus of mine.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That was a wonderful, likely intro to many of my followers on what peptides are. Yeah. And there are so many. Again, we'll have to talk more in the future about additional peptides. But thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your really wealth of knowledge with us on nutrients to support mitochondrial function as well as peptides. So Thank you for your time being on the show today.
I appreciate it. Thanks.